destructive. It aims at the very existence of Palestinians in all its forms. The cities and camps face daily incursions, constant attacks on the infrastructure, on civilian life. We also see an escalation of the crimes of settlers under the protection of the army. This includes arson, beating, collective expulsions, confiscation of land. Only yesterday, 140 homes were destroyed in Tulkarem by the occupation forces, in addition to what we see in Jerusalem, and a threat to annex the West Bank only yesterday, in spite of the decisions of this council, the GA and the Security Council, in spite of the advisory, of the provisional measures called for by the ICJ, the occupying power continues its genocide. Therefore, the countries of the world are called upon to shoulder their legal, moral, and humanitarian responsibility. They must abide by Article 146 of the Fourth Geneva Convention to stop the transfer of weapons, not to cooperate with settlements, and it is time to take the necessary actions. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne à présent.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Independent Human Rights Commission of the State of Palestine for a video statement.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, we express our deep appreciation for the honest and principled report presented by Ms. Francesca Albanese. Her findings expose the catastrophic reality endured by the Palestinian people, particularly in Gaza, where atrocities unfold daily. Yet there is a darker, often overlooked dimension to this tragedy, the complicity of private corporations in fueling and profiting from the suffering. We are not speaking of fringe actors. These are major corporations, technology giants, and arms manufacturers, supplying tools, intelligence, and weapons that turn Gaza into both a battlefield and a business venture. When a family is killed by a drone strike in their home, or when a medic is tracked using spyware and then targeted, behind that attack may lie a corporate logo, a line of code, a signed contract in a distant capital. International investigations have documented how these companies provide surveillance systems to identify civilian targets, deploy spyware to track journalists, medics, and activists, manufacture drones used in assassinations and bombings of populated areas, supply equipment that destroy hospitals, water systems, schools, and shelters. Under international law, such acts may constitute aiding and abetting international crimes, including genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, and may trigger criminal or civil liability. Mr. President, we must confront the moral question: has killing become a modality? Can profit justify starvation, destruction, and mass death? We therefore urge this council to recognize these companies as actors in the conflict, include them in the UN's business and human rights database, and ensure accountability through domestic courts under universal jurisdiction. Justice is not a slogan, it is a duty. Those who sell the tools of extermination must no longer hide behind boardrooms. Silence is not neutrality, silence is complicity. And the people of Gaza can be no more silent partners in their destruction. Thank you.
Merci. La liste.
Thank you. The list of speakers is now closed. I would like to invite interested delegations to ask questions or to comment on the report. And I would remind you that speaking time is limited to 1 minute 30 seconds for each speaker. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. President. The EU takes note of the Special Rapporteur's report. The EU will continue cooperating with the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights to promote the implementation of the UN Guiding Principles. The EU will continue supporting the adoption of national action plans and developing an EU framework for implementation. The EU is committed to fully comply with international law and to implement EU legislation. The EU expresses its commitment to ensure that in line with international law, all agreements between Israel and the EU must indicate their inapplicability to the territory occupied by Israel in 1967. This does not constitute a boycott of Israel, which the EU strongly opposes. There must be accountability for violations of international law. The EU calls for an immediate ceasefire and the release of hostages, leading to a permanent end to hostilities. Concerning the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, there is an urgent need for the immediate removal of all restrictions to humanitarian assistance in accordance with IHL. The EU strongly condemns the further escalation in the West Bank and recalls its statement at the ID with the COI. The EU reiterates the need to cooperate with relevant HRC mechanisms and to fully respect their mandates. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan on behalf of the OIC.
Thank you, Mr. President. The OIC welcomes the distinguished Special Rapporteur and thanks her for presenting the mandate's latest report. We reaffirm our abiding support for the mandate. We have witnessed attempts to launch relentless defamatory attacks and smear campaigns against successive mandate holders, including Mr. John Dugard, Mr. Richard Falk, Mr. Richard Link, and now Mr. Michael Link, and now against Ms. Francesca Albanese. We take strong exception to the ongoing targeted disinformation being spread against Ms. Albanese by certain quarters and reject the baseless allegations against the mandate holder, who is being targeted for daring to discharge a vital mandate with courage and determination, as have other UN human rights mechanisms and high officials. Such malicious and personally disparaging attacks must not be allowed to continue. Madam Special Rapporteur, we welcome your reports on the crime of genocide committed by Israel, the occupying power in the Gaza Strip. We call on all countries and international organizations to take measures, including an immediate ban on the export or transfer of arms, ammunition, or dual-use materials to the occupying power, in addition to sanctions. Furthermore, we call on the international community to ban the products of the illegal Israeli settlements from entering their markets and to take measures against individuals and entities involved in or benefiting from the perpetuation of occupation and settlement regime. The two-state solution is the only viable solution to reach peace and stability in the region. Over the past 77 years, generations of diplomats have contributed to strengthening human rights.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ghana on behalf of the Africa Group.
Mr. President, the African Group thanks the Special Rapporteur for her report, highlighting the involvement of business enterprises in international crimes linked to Israel's unlawful occupation of the occupied Palestinian territory. We express deep concern over the ongoing violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law against the Palestinian people, including the military operations in Gaza, the deliberate targeting of civilians and humanitarian workers, destruction of infrastructure, systematic obstruction of aid, and the illegal prolonged blockade on Gaza. We denounce Israel's colonial policies and the collective punitive measures against civilians in Gaza and attempts to forcibly displace its residents. We call on Israel to comply fully with the ICJ's provisional measures and reiterate our support for relevant UN General Assembly resolutions and the AU's consistent call for a permanent ceasefire. The African Group stresses the need to address root causes of the conflict, including ending the illegal occupation, lifting the blockade, halting settlement activity, and releasing arbitrarily detained Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank. And finally, Mr. President, the African Group firmly rejects all attacks and attempts to silence the Special Rapporteur. Her mandate must be protected to uphold truth, accountability, and justice for the Palestinian people. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à...
Thank you. I give the floor to the delegation of Bahrain for a video statement on behalf of the Arab Group.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Special Rapporteur for the very important report that shows a complicated system of complicity. The report sheds light on the role of multinational corporations in order to enhance a colonial system that is based on denying the very existence of the Palestinian people. The Arab Group expresses its grave concern on the export of surveillance technology that is being tested on Palestinians as revealed in the report. What is happening in the OPT, especially in Gaza, is no longer just an occupation. It is a system that aims at destroying all bases of life. It makes return and reconstruction almost impossible. We condemn the unjustified attacks on the SR, and we fully support her mandate. We call on the full respect of the provisional measures of the ICJ and to stop any political or material support that allows the perpetration of crimes against the Palestinians. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne...
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait on behalf of the GCC.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. تتقدم دول.
Thank you, Mr. President. The GCC states would like to thank the Special Rapporteur and we appreciate her efforts as part of her mandate. We are concerned about the content of the report with regard to violations against the Palestinian people, and we reiterate the need to respect international law and the IHL. President, the GCC states reiterates their principal position regarding the Palestinian question and the need to end the Israeli occupation of Palestinian Arab territories that are occupied and enable the Palestinian people to exercise their right to self-determination in establishing its independent states on the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with the Arab Peace Initiative and other international resolutions. We are concerned about what the Palestinian people are enduring in Gaza Strip, as well as the West Bank in terms of violations of international law, international humanitarian law, and we condemn the Israeli aggression and the collective punishment policy, forced displacement, attempts to alter the demographic nature of the Palestinian territory, including in East Jerusalem. The GCC states reiterates its invitation to international community to shoulder its responsibility to end these violations and to provide international protection for the Palestinian people and to ensure and hinder the humanitarian delivery. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la...
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the Nordline movement.
Mr. President, the NAM appreciates the Special Rapporteur for her work and will come with concern the report highlighting the plight of Palestinian people, including the corporate complicit in violations of international law. The NAM condemns in the strongest terms the acts of aggression and collective punishment by Israel, the occupying power, against the Palestinian people in grave breach of international law, and the continued killing and injury of tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians, including children and women. We note with alarm the report's conclusion that the economy of the occupation has evolved into an economy of genocide, with corporations knowingly contributing to the destruction of vital infrastructure, resulting in grave violations of international law. NAM also demands an end to the illegal occupation and siege and calls for the entry of humanitarian aid at scale. We also demand the immediate end to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has facilitated a restricted aid regime and contributed to the deliberate killing of hundreds of Palestinians to date. In conclusion, Mr. President, the NAM extends its full support to the government of Palestine and the Special Rapporteur and her mandate in the ongoing efforts to put an end to the occupation of the land of the State of Palestine. A full text will be posted on the extranet. I thank you.
Merci, Madame. Je donne l'ordre.
Thank you, Madam. I now give the floor to the Sovereign Order of Malta.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. The Sovereign Order of Malta takes note of the Special Rapporteur's report and agrees for the need of accountability by businesses engaging in violations in the OPTs. We continue to deplore the grave violations of human rights and international law in the OPTs, especially concerning the rights to freedom of religion or belief, freedom of worship, access to healthcare and education, and of course the deliberate attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructures. The economic situation in the OPTs is indeed catastrophic, mainly due to the ongoing war in Gaza. Furthermore, in the West Bank, destructions, expropriations, forced displacement, settler violence, restriction of movement, and other measures have greatly impacted the local population. In Bethlehem, for instance, the end of the tourism business has led to the loss of income and livelihoods of many who are now unable to buy basic necessities and therefore lack food and medicine. The recovery, not only economically, will be long and painful. The Order of Malta reiterates its call for an unconditional, immediate ceasefire, the dignified release of hostages, and full humanitarian access, respecting its core principles. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à la
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Maldives.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Maldives commends a special rapporteur for her report, which focused on the role of corporate entities in sustaining Israel's illegal occupation. We are deeply alarmed by the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, marked by extermination, forced starvation, and the deliberate targeting of civilians, including women, children, journalists, and aid workers. Famine conditions have persisted since March 2025, alongside widespread destruction of critical infrastructure. These acts are flagrant violation of international law and a serious threat to the international rules-based order. Mr. President, the Maldives also calls on the international community and all states to act with urgency and resolve. Impose an arms embargo, terminate all military and economic cooperation that sustains the occupation, and ensure accountability through robust international mechanisms. The world cannot stand while Israel continues its atrocities and international law is systematically undermined. Further delay is indefensible. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Mr. President. We reaffirm our full support for the mandate of a special rapporteur and express our solidarity in the face of all unjustified attacks and pressures. We commend the President's reports for exposing the political economy behind Israel's genocidal occupation. It shows how corporations, investors, and institutions are complicit in this crime through financial and technological support, including AI systems that enable genocide to be committed with zero accountability. In line with international law, we stress the urgent responsibility of states and corporate actors to conduct due diligence, and we call for immediate economic sanctions against Israeli regime to end corporate profiteering from genocide. Israeli regime suspended its full-scale genocidal campaign for only 2 weeks, exactly when it came under decisive strikes by the armed forces of Islamic Republic of Iran. This undeniable fact proves once more that this regime understands no language but the language of force, not the language of law, nor the voices of civilized nations. The Iranian nation and its glorious history have always defeated the forces of evil and aggressors throughout time. Once again, we have pushed back this inhuman force that came with all its might. We stand unshaken and never surrender. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to remind delegations when referring to the authorities of a state, you're requested to use the language and terminology adopted in United Nations practice. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Mr. President, Indonesia strongly condemns Israel's relentless massacre of the Palestinian people, systematic destruction of civilian infrastructure, and deliberate starvation in Gaza. The total siege of Gaza, obstruction of humanitarian assistance, and attacks on aid seekers extend far beyond tragedies. These crimes have too long persisted with impunity, enabled by the complicity of various actors, including corporate entities. We commend the Special Rapporteur's critical work in unveiling the corporate networks that perpetuate Israel's genocidal acts against Palestinians. The ICJ advisory opinion has made it clear corporate entities bear a prima facie duty to fully withdraw from any dealings that sustain Israel's illegal occupation in OPT. We urge all states to uphold their human rights obligation by enforcing accountability for corporations complicit in serious international law violation in OPT. The vast business structures entangled with this colonial enterprise must be dismantled. Madam Special Rapporteur, how can states strengthen the mandatory due diligence to compel corporations operating in their jurisdiction to disengage from crimes against the Palestinian people? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, Pakistan warmly welcomes the Special Rapporteur and affirms abiding support for and solidarity with the mandate holder and deplores the personal attacks and accusations against her. Pakistan reiterates its call on the international community for an immediate end to Israel's genocidal campaign and to ensure a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. The never-ending expansion of the Israeli ground operations in Gaza and escalating assault on Palestinians in the West Bank pose grave threats to lasting peace, which hinges upon the emergence of a Palestinian state on the pre-June 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Mr. President, we appreciate the Special Rapporteur for bringing into focus the system of incentives that enables the perpetuation of illegal occupation. We also appreciate her efforts to review the legal framework for responsibility of corporate entities in illegally occupied Palestine. The illegality of benefits derived from perpetuation of occupation is well established in international law. In a world where businesses appear so sensitive to concerns such as animal cruelty and environmental harm, where is their sense of responsibility towards the besieged Palestinian people? Echoing the OIC group, generations of diplomats have contributed to strengthened international human rights legal framework. We now confront a defining moment. Whether this work still has meaning and sincerity, let us not fail our future. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, we congratulate the Special Rapporteur and her team for this important and timely report. We reaffirm our enduring support for her mandate. We must confront a growing and sinister reality. The OPT has become a laboratory for surveillance technologies, autonomous weapon systems, and crowd control tactics. These systems are tested on a population living under siege and marketed as combat proven to international clients. This is profiteering from war crimes. It implicates not only the occupying power, but also private corporations, arms manufacturers, tech firms, and logistic providers who knowingly enable these violations. The principle is clear. A genocide left unpunished is a genocide bound to be repeated. Turkey stands unwavering in its support for the Palestinian people and the enforcement of international law. We affirm the occupation must end, settlements must be dismantled, the blockade of Gaza must be lifted. All UN and ICJ decisions must be implemented in full. Those who commit or enable atrocity crimes, state or private actors, must face justice. Turkey will continue to use all its rights under international law to hold perpetrators accountable. We consider the Palestinian issue central to regional and global justice and peace. It is not a marginal conflict. It is a test case for the viability of international law. Let us conclude by reaffirming our case for a fair and lasting settlement, a two-state solution with the establishment of a sovereign, independent, contiguous state of Palestine based on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam. And I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Special Rapporteur for her report, and we value the efforts made to document the flagrant violations endured by the Palestinian people. We express our concern about the documented violations in the report against the Palestinian people, in addition to the deliberate and continued violation of international law, international humanitarian law, as well as the total disregard of the decisions of the ICJ and relevant Security Council resolutions. We condemn the manifestations of the collective punishment policy of Israel against the civilians in view of a stifling blockade for months, denial of assistance, and targeting humanitarian and relief workers in a flagrant violation of international law. We need to find a political horizon to meet the aspirations of the Palestinian people to establish their independent state, to spare the region circles or cycles of escalation. We also condemn the smear campaigns against the Special Rapporteur that undermines the credibility of the Human Rights Council. We reiterate that we cannot overlook the suffering of the Palestinian people, and its endeavor for justice is a moral imperative that is unavoidable. Thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, Mr. President, our Council today looks into a report that reflects truth and documents what's happening in the OPT. Violations against the Palestinian people are multifold. They are not perpetrated only by the brutal military machinery. It is not only policies of extremists. It also includes business, trade, and industry, as is documented in the report under review. We meet again, Mr. President, to shoulder our legal and organizational responsibility. We can only stand with our conscience, with our common values. We must take steps to prevent violations taking place and provide guarantees to this people to work on achieving a just and comprehensive peace that ends occupation and establishes an independent Palestinian state within the lines of the 4th of June 1967. The Palestinian people, like all other people, has a right to protection, to justice, to freedom, and to self-determination. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. And now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السيد الرئيس نثمن جهود السيدة فرانشيسكا ألبانيزي.
Thank you, President. We appreciate the efforts of Ms. Albanese and we thank her for her support. We condemn the fact that the Israeli authorities refused access to her to the occupied Palestinian territory, and we condemn the fact that she has been the subject of attacks and pressure during the exercise of her mandate. We condemn the settlement activities of the Israeli authorities, which have undermined the two-state solution. The attacks against Gaza is a genocidal war, which led to forced displacements, the destruction of infrastructure. Israel is flagrantly violating international resolutions and law, and it is violating the Security Council resolutions from 2016 and the ICJ advisory opinion, which stipulates that the settlements since 1967, including East Jerusalem, are completely illegitimate and a flagrant violation of international law, and that all states must not recognize the existence of Israeli authority over the OPT. We call upon Israeli authorities to assume their responsibility to bring an end to the war in Gaza, the genocide, and to bring aid to the Palestinian people, and to guarantee that they enjoy their rights. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, the UAE reiterates its principled position calling for an immediate cessation of the Israeli war against Gaza, protection of civilians, and ensure delivery of unhindered humanitarian assistance. Diplomacy is the only way to move ahead in the region, and sustainable political solutions pave the way for security, stability, and perennial peace. International law should not be implemented selectively, and its respect should be comprehensive and on an equal footing to preserve justice and safeguard human rights for all. We condemn the collective punishment of Israel against the Palestinian people, the brotherly Palestinian people, repeated violations by Israeli extremists, and incitement to hatred and violence is a systematic campaign that does not only target the Palestinian people, but the international community. Therefore, the UAE reiterates the need to respect international law and the IHL and to end all violations against civilians and infrastructure in Gaza and the West Bank, and to stop the attacks of settlers and their incitement against Palestinians. In closing, as long as the Palestinian people are denied their right to the independent state, the conflict will continue to rise in the region, and the tension and violence will continue unless the root causes are addressed through comprehensive settlement, a two-state solution, and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital that brings peace and security for all. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sri Lanka expresses its grave concern at the unprecedented escalation of violence and the relentless attacks on civilians in Gaza, leading to an immense loss of life and further aggravating and exacerbating an already dire humanitarian situation. Concrete steps are needed to de-escalate the situation, engage in diplomatic efforts, and sustain peace to ensure stability in the region. The suffering of the people of Gaza and the West Bank, especially women, children, and the most vulnerable, has intensified due to the lack of access to humanitarian assistance. They continue to face severe shortages of critical supplies and services, including food and water. The lack of genuine dialogue and political commitment to a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders has hampered efforts to bring closure to the suffering of the people in Palestine. Sri Lanka reiterates the call for an immediate, unconditional and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, the unconditional release of hostages and detainees on both sides, and uninterrupted access to humanitarian assistance. We also reiterate our support for the work of UNRWA and reaffirm the vital work that it carries out. It is absolutely necessary that UNRWA and the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs are able to continue their mandated and essential humanitarian work in the occupied Palestinian territories. Finally, Sri Lanka reiterates the right of Palestinian people to statehood and calls for Palestine's full membership in the UN as endorsed by the UN General Assembly. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
Mr. President, we thank the Special Rapporteur for her report that highlights the complicity of corporates that exercise activities in the occupied Palestinian territory, and also the genocide war against the Palestinian people. We also reiterate our full support to her mandate. The activities of these corporates or corporations is a failure of international law because it supports the settler existence of the Israelis and denies the Palestinian self-determination. We support the call for immediate ending of the Israeli occupation, remedy and compensation in accordance with the advisory opinion of the ICJ, and to also activate tools of accountability against the Israeli occupier and other corporates. Algeria calls for international solidarity with the right of the Palestinian people to statehood with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. يتقدم وفد.
Thank you, President. My delegation wishes to thank the Special Rapporteur for her report. We appreciate greatly all of her efforts to expose the reality and the flagrant violations that the Palestinian people are suffering from. Tunisia reiterates its support for her mandate faced with a campaign against her by the occupying power. This report exposes the scale of the pernicious corruption, the international network with multinationals, tech companies, financial and military companies involved in supporting the colonial occupation to create a genocidal economy which acts against the Palestinian people, an economy that kills women and children, destroys infrastructure, and undermines the existence of Palestine. We condemn the aggression of the occupying power against the Palestinian people in Gaza. This is a genocide in the true sense of the term. Tunisia rejects the double standards which are seen given this situation, and we call upon the international community to not support in financial or technological terms the occupying power for crimes to be committed against the Palestinian people. There needs to be a full, complete embargo, a blockade against the occupying power. We must not deal with them, must not trade with them. Otherwise, we're supporting the occupation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We take note of the report and thank the Special Rapporteur. We condemn the continued aggression of Israel against the Palestinian people, as well as the flagrant violations of international law and IHL, and the consequent killing of innocent civilians and destruction of property and infrastructure. The Kingdom reiterates its rejection of all the practices that displace the Palestinians or touch on their legitimate rights, and the international community should shoulder its responsibility to end this aggression and to provide protection for civilians and to ensure humanitarian delivery without obstacles. We reiterate the right of the Palestinian people to statehood on the borders of the 4th of June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital, in accordance with the Arab Peace Initiative and relevant international resolutions. The Kingdom calls on all parties to sincerely work to revitalize the peace course and achieve the two-state solution to anchor peace and stability, and to enable the Palestinians to exercise their legitimate rights. Thank you, President.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Oman.
Mr. President, the Sultanate of Oman expresses its appreciation to Ms. Albanese. We thank her for the detailed report that sheds light on legal and humanitarian dimensions represented by the participation of economic actors in perpetuating Israeli occupation. The report spoke of corporations providing services or infrastructure that are used in illegal colonial projects. We believe that dealing with this situation needs an effective commitment by states and stakeholders to make sure there's no complicity of the private sector that can run counter to international law. We must enhance the mechanisms of accountability, including all parties that participate in systematic violations of human rights. We reaffirm our firm position that supports international efforts to end occupation and allow the Palestinian people to exercise their legitimate rights, foremost amongst which the right to self-determination. I thank you.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
Lebanon thanks the Special Rapporteur for her report and strongly support her mandate. We find merit in the report's approach, as it is important to remind corporate and private sectors about their responsibilities regarding human rights. The competition for profit should not make businesses turn a blind eye to the illicit settlements and the atrocities and war crimes committed in Gaza and occupied Palestinian territories. As the war on Gaza is not letting up, entailing continuous killing of innocent civilians, massive destructions, and forced displacement, we are left with the impression that occupation and denial of Palestinians' basic rights, notably the right to self-determination, have reached horrifying levels. The international community couldn't remain ineffective as the occupying power has lost all forms of restraint, hence erasing any hope for a just and lasting peace in the Middle East. The international community is urgently asked for a more forceful approach towards the occupying power, and the business sector should act responsibly in this regard. Genocidal actions should draw universal condemnation and trigger tangible actions to end crimes and impunity. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
Thank you, Mr. President. We associate ourselves with the statements of the groups that we belong to, and we also appreciate the efforts of the Special Rapporteur in her report. In view of the escalation of the policies of the occupying power and the expansion of illegal settlements on the occupied Palestinian territory, the state of Kuwait condemns the violations committed by the occupying power against a number of villages and cities in the West Bank, latest of which was the terrorist attack against the village of Kafr Malik east of Ramallah, and that led to the fall of a number of martyrs and wounded. And also the collective punishment policy, forced displacement, attempts to alter the demographic nature of the Palestinian territory. We reiterate the fact that settlement is a flagrant violation of international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. We call on the international community to shoulder its responsibilities, especially the Security Council, while continuing to providing support to help the Palestinian people, including to achieve self-determination and freedom in the independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital on the borders of the 4th of June 1967, in accordance with international resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brazil thanks the Special Rapporteur for the report, which puts into perspective the role and responsibility of business enterprises regarding human rights violation, the OPT. It shows how exploitation and colonization of the OPT by Israel are connected to the activities conducted by business enterprises, which severely affect social, economic, and cultural rights of the Palestinian people and the right to development. The current situation in the OPT reflects actions that undermine prospects for a political solution to the conflict. In Gaza, the indiscriminate destruction, restrictions on humanitarian aid, and threats of occupation are deeply concerning and incompatible with international law, particularly international human rights and international humanitarian law. In the West Bank, the announcement of new Israeli settlements is in complete disregard to the 2024 ICJ advisory opinion. The escalating violence perpetrated by the Israeli army and settlers further undermines the viability of a two-state solution and contributes to serious and systematic human rights violations against the Palestinian population. Once again, Brazil recalls that attacks against civilians and obstruction of access to humanitarian aid constitute violations of international law and war crimes. All parties to the conflict must respect international human rights and humanitarian law. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Senegal. President, Senegal aligns itself with the statements made by the groups it belongs to and thanks the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of her well-documented report on the unfortunate events in Gaza and the West Bank. Despite repeated appeals for de-escalation and a ceasefire, a campaign of forced displacement is ongoing in a sustained manner, causing massive destruction in Gaza, and humanitarian reports are quite horrifying. Urgency calls us to intensify our diplomatic efforts to see a peaceful settlement of this conflict, and the report highlights rather worrying collusion between the political and financial authorities to keep dominance in the occupied territories. And here we need to underline the need to respect international law and international human rights and international humanitarian law, and to apply the provisional measures decided upon by the ICJ on the 26th of January 2024 and the advisory opinion of July 2024. We should not resign ourselves to the multilateralism crisis. We must, on the contrary, renew our consensus in favour of an international system based on rules and justice, giving a privileged place to dialogue and mutually beneficial cooperation. Senegal reasserts its unwavering support for the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to the two-state solution in line with the relevant resolutions of the United Nations. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the League of Arab States.
Monsieur le Président, طالب جامعة الدول
Mr. President, the League of Arab States appreciates the Special Rapporteur for her bold and courageous report that exposes a system of international complicity. A number of multinational corporates in the area of technology, armament, energy, and financing is part and parcel of the Israeli occupation, and also a partner in the economy of genocide against the Palestinian people. The report shows the complicity of these corporations in supporting the illegal settlement and occupation, and the failure to exercise due diligence in the area of human rights and avoiding the repercussions of their activities despite the legal and moral or ethical repercussions. The responsibility of the international community is clear in preventing and punishing any complicity or connivance or contribution to international crimes, and to stop any support that would feed the occupation or entrench genocide. We call on the United Nations to be fully committed to the opinion of the ICJ and to expand the database of implicated companies, and that the United Nations system should not deal with any entity implicated in crimes. In closing, all Arab states stand with the Palestinian people in its just struggle to obtain their rights, and we call on the international community to take immediate and practical measures to stop profiting from occupation. Thank you.
Representant de Maurice.
I call the distinguished representative of Mauritius.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mauritius aligns itself with the statements delivered by Ghana on behalf of the African Group and Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. We express appreciation to the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of a report and taken note of the recommendations contained in it. Mauritius remains deeply concerned by the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in the occupied Palestine territory. We are dismayed indeed that since October 7, 2023, more than 57,000 innocent Palestinians have been killed, with over 2 million displaced. Mauritius strongly condemns the violations of the basic human rights and fundamental freedoms of the Palestinians, including their forced displacement, all contrary to international human rights and humanitarian law. We also call for the immediate and unconditional release of all, and we stress all, hostages in line with the Fourth Geneva Convention, and the unimpeded access to humanitarian aid. Mauritius considers that through illegal occupation, Israel has denied and continues to deny Palestinians of their right to self-determination. We reiterate our call for a two-state solution in line with international law and all relevant UN resolutions.
Thank you. I recognize the distinguished representative of Libya.
ينضم وفد بلادي لبيانات المجموعات التي ينتمي إليها.
We align ourselves with the statements made by the groups we belong to. We wish to thank Ms. Albanese and commend her courage in defending the rights of the Palestinian people who are suffering a genocide, seeking to erase them for their territory. We condemn the politicized attacks against the Special Rapporteur and reiterate our full support for the rapporteurship. We highlight the outcome outcome of the report. We are shocked, President, by what is delineated in this report, particularly the collusion of companies and the actions of the occupying power, the fact that the Palestinian people are being used as a laboratory to test war weaponry. These companies must cease their profiteering from the slaughter and the torture of innocent people. We must seek accountability for these at the national and international level. There must be full respect for international humanitarian law and for law in general. They must be held accountable for their acts. We have to reflect on the responsibility of states of these companies, and the European Union is the main partner of the occupying power. The President interrupts the Speaker.
President, thank you. Ireland aligns with the statement of the EU, and we thank the Special Rapporteur for her report. The situation in Gaza is catastrophic, and we call for a return to a ceasefire, the release of hostages, and the immediate and unimpeded resumption of humanitarian access at scale into and throughout Gaza. We are appalled, President, by the ongoing mass casualty incidents near the militarised Israeli-approved distribution centres and the extreme insufficiency of aid entering Gaza. It is unacceptable that Palestinians in Gaza are risking their lives for food. There must be a prompt and impartial investigation into each of these attacks with full accountability. In the West Bank, we are seeing unprecedented levels of violence, large-scale displacement of the Palestinian population, and record levels of settlement construction. Attacks by settlers, seemingly acting with impunity, continue to erode work to achieve the two-state solution. Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, it should be recalled, are illegal and undermine the viability of the two-state solution. Following the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 19 July 2024, my government is progressing legislation to prohibit the import of goods from settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory. We continue to support and greatly value the work of special rapporteurs. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco. Thank you, President. The Kingdom of Morocco firmly condemns the Israeli attacks which are ongoing in Palestinian territories. This is a serious, unacceptable violation of international law and international humanitarian law, and it violates all human rights principles. The Kingdom of Morocco reiterates its call for a cessation of the hostilities and a return to negotiations with a hope for a definitive ceasefire. There must be action to put an end to Israeli military actions in the West Bank, particularly the destruction of houses, the displacement of people, and no possibility of bringing in humanitarian aid, especially food and medicine. We must ensure we do everything we can for the Palestinians. We reiterate the importance of the roadmap for rebuilding as seen in the Cairo Extraordinary Summit. It must be placed under the control of the Palestinians with oversight. We have to think about our brothers and sisters. The Kingdom of Morocco reiterates that we must seek a political solution. I recognize Brunei Darussalam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our full statement will be available on the extranet. We thank the Special Rapporteur for her tireless efforts in fulfilling her mandate and specifically her latest report. Recent developments on the ground, particularly in Gaza, point to acts amounting to genocide, resulting in tens of thousands of Palestinians killed and hundreds of thousands injured. Brunei strongly condemns this continued acts of violence and aggression by the occupying power. This decades-long impunity must end. The report highlights that such acts are driven not only by state policy, but also supported by private and corporate actors that have profited from illegal occupation, apartheid, and now genocide. Accountability must extend to all complicit. So we accord the rapporteur's recommendation that all such business activities and relationships should be promptly seized and terminated. In accordance with international corporate responsibility, we urge all parties to fully implement the ICJ's judgments, orders, and provisional measures. We also recognize the Special Rapporteur's recommendation to impose sanctions and a full arms embargo on the occupying power. Brunei supports all efforts towards a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East, and reaffirm our full support for an independent and sovereign state of Palestine on the basis of the two-state solution based on pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, President. Mexico thanks the rapporteur for her report. We view with concern reports on the involvement of Israeli-based companies in activities related to violations of international humanitarian law and violations of human law through the manufacturing of weapons for the slaughter and mass destruction in Gaza and the West Bank. We reiterate our deepest concern on the proliferation of weapons, particularly its unlawful trade and their disproportionate use in the context of occupation and armed complex. We also regret the restrictive control of Palestinian natural resources and the role of certain companies in the demolition of Palestinian housing and infrastructure as part of the settlements and outposts in the OPTs, which run counter to international law. We launch an appeal to companies to act with due diligence pursuant to the guiding principles on business and human rights. To conclude, Mexico expresses its deep concern for the unacceptable threats and intimidation against Rapporteur Albanese. We launch an appeal on all states to cooperate with special procedures and to respect their independence. Thank you, sir.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg. Thank you, President. Luxembourg aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. We thank Madam Special Rapporteur for her report and reiterate our appeal to the Israeli authorities to cooperate with her mandate. The restrictions imposed on the work of the United Nations and humanitarian organizations for the supply of international aid and its distribution in Gaza, as well as the chaos and violence at distribution points, are unacceptable. We call once again on the Israeli government to fully comply with international humanitarian law and to restore access for international aid. We must re-establish a ceasefire to put an end to the suffering of the civilian people. Madam Special Rapporteur, your report highlights the responsibility of private enterprises and economic stakeholders in the process of occupation and colonization of the Palestinian territory, which has been considered illegal by the ICJ in its decision of 19 July 2024. Through their activities, these companies are perpetuating the illegal occupation and the violation of the rights of Palestinians to self-determination. In 2016, this council decided to establish a database on companies active in the OPTs. How can we ensure that the enterprises concerned exercises their duty of diligence and fully respect the guiding principles on business and human rights? Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia. President, we wish to commend the Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, commend her for her persistence and her integrity investigating the genocide in Gaza for the past 2 years. Her report takes further the discussions of the Working Group on Business and Human Rights, and it highlights the war economy, the economy of occupation and genocide, which is made sustainable because of the support it receives from the industrial sector. We agree with the rapporteur's assessment. She says that there must be clear standards ensuring that companies carry out their activities in the respect and protection of human rights as a framework. This, in fact, has led Colombia to prohibit the export of coal to Israel because of the activities of companies there. The report presented by the Special Rapporteur will also feed into the emergency conference on Gaza, which will be held in Bogota on the 15th and 16th of July. All states that are willing to make efforts to put an end to the genocide in Gaza are invited to participate in this conference. And we welcome the Special Rapporteur to Colombia already, as we will welcome everyone else who will wish to join forces as part of this initiative. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, President. My delegation wishes to welcome the Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese. We reiterate our support for her mandate and commend her efforts to expose the crimes committed by the occupying powers on the defenseless Palestinian people. We roundly condemn the crimes committed by the occupying power, especially the genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanities in the OPTs, particularly in Gaza. In fact, there is a prevention of access for humanitarian aid, and food distribution posts are being used to target families that are waiting for food distribution. We condemn the systematic destruction of all the different camps. Iraq calls on the international community to shoulder its ethical and legal responsibility. We must do everything we can to put an end to the genocide being suffered by the Palestinian people. We must put an end to the obstruction of aid and help Palestinian families. We restate our support for the Palestinian people and to the right, their right to self-determination and to live within an independent state.
Presidente.
Thank you, President. Venezuela wishes to express its unrestricted support to the Special Rapporteur, who's been denouncing the genocide committed by Israel against the Palestinian people, which the United Nations system has not been able to put a halt to. The genocide, why does the genocide continue? Because it is profitable, says the report. The method used by US and European companies used to finance Hitler continues to be used today. We have seen Coca-Cola, Nestle, General Motors, amongst many other companies, are being used as part of a Nazi expansionist system, and everyone will end up richer. There are companies that were being used to persecute Jews once. It's very ironical that they're now being used to prosecute the Palestinian people. The business is death. We condemn roundly the war of extermination being waged by Israel and allied powers. Those who are silent today will always be silent on the worst crime of this century. We want to organize a summit on this war. To not do anything is to be complicit. Thank you.
Thank you. I really invite delegations to respect the tolerance that must guide the language that is appropriate for this room. and for the mandate of this Council in your declarations. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. South Africa commends Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese for her illuminating but also disturbing report, highlighting how corporate entities which have been profiting from the economy of foreign occupation in the OPT are now profiting from the genocide economy in Gaza. In so doing, these corporate entities serve to facilitate the denial of the Palestinians' inalienable right to self-determination, aiding and abetting the perpetration of atrocious crimes, together with a catalogue of human rights violations, which have metastasized beyond Gaza to encompass the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Accordingly, South Africa supports the call for corporate entities to immediately terminate their activities. As the Special Rapporteur cautions, recent judicial developments leave no room for doubt that engagement with any component of the occupation by corporate entities runs contrary to international law. Much as we need to hold Israel accountable for its depravity, we too must ensure that corporate entities are similarly held accountable for the role that they play in this regard. Just as the international community came together to rally against apartheid South Africa, we call for the very same actions in solidarity with the Palestinians and against occupation and exploitation. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au...
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Mr. President, we thank the Special Rapporteur for her report. Bangladesh condemns in the strongest possible terms the unabated, brutal aggression, violence, and atrocities of Israel, killing hundreds of thousands of Palestinian people in Gaza, most of whom are children. Accountability for these acts must be ensured. Bangladesh remains gravely concerned by the use of corporate and technological infrastructures that perpetuates occupation, apartheid, and, as the report asserts, an economy of genocide. We share the Special Rapporteur's deep concern regarding the documented complicity of various corporate actors who continue to profit from the occupation. This cycle of impunity, coupled with the indifferent attitude of the international community and profiteering by the accomplice corporations, has only encouraged the occupying forces to commit repeated grave violations of human rights and perpetuate the atrocities. We believe that ending the occupation is essential for the realization of peace, stability, and development in the region. The international community must take every possible measures to immediately end this illegal occupation and enforce lasting ceasefire in Gaza. Unrestricted and adequate humanitarian assistance in Gaza and OPT must be ensured also. Finally, we reaffirm our unwavering support to the Palestinian people's legitimate struggle for self-determination till the establishment of sovereign state of Palestine based on the two-state solution and pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Monsieur le Président, Sierra Leone aligns itself with the statement delivered by the African Group, the NAM, the OIC, and thanks the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Francesca Albanese, for her report. We are deeply concerned by the ongoing reports of human suffering in Gaza and the West Bank. This includes the impact of Israel's military operations and the destruction of infrastructure, as well as the challenges to humanitarian access. These consequences and developments on the lives and dignity of civilians are deeply troubling. The role of international cooperation and business in the occupied Palestinian territory is a matter of deep concern. Sierra Leone calls for the full implementation of all relevant resolutions in this regard. The protection of civilians, including humanitarian personnel, and the provision of unhindered humanitarian assistance must be upheld at all times. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire and an unconditional release of all captives on both sides. The people of Gaza have suffered enough. Addressing the root causes of the conflict is essential to achieving a just and lasting solution. Sierra Leone firmly supports a two-state solution pursuant to relevant UN resolutions. This solution would allow for the realization of the Palestinian people's rights to self-determination and the establishment of an independent state of Palestine based on the 4th of June 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, living side by side with Israel in peace, security, and prosperity. And I thank you, President.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the report of Ms. Albanese and firmly condemn any attempts to silence or intimidate her for her courageous efforts to shed light on the denial of a people's right to exist. Turning to the substance of the report, we are deeply alarmed by the findings presented, which document the systematic entrenchment of an economy built not only on occupation and apartheid, but now, as the Special Rapporteur unequivocally concludes, on genocide. The report lays bare the role of corporate entities and their enablers in sustaining and profiting from this machinery of destruction, from arms manufacturers to tech conglomerates, construction firms, financial institutions, and universities. It highlights a global network of complicity that has turned the occupied Palestinian territory into a testing ground for war profiteering, while the very right of the Palestinian people to exist is threatened with extinction. This marks a catastrophic breakdown of moral responsibility within the international system itself, enabled by the deafening silence, calculated exceptionalism, and rampant impunity of corporations and states alike. We urge this Council and the international community to act decisively. To conclude, Eritrea reaffirms its unwavering support for the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, including their right to self-determination and statehood. I thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Slovenia aligns with the EU statement. We thank the Special Rapporteur for her report addressing the adverse impact of the wartime economy on the rights of Palestinians. International humanitarian law and human rights law are unambiguous. Israel, as the occupying power, bears the duty to protect and to ensure human rights of all people living under its occupation. While words fall short to describe the profound torment of the people in Gaza, our concerns about the situation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem continue to mount. In addition to the escalating unrest, silent violence that manifests itself in the control over natural resources, including water, has persisted for decades. Such intolerable practices violate the human rights of Palestinians and place entire generations at risk. Madam Special Rapporteur, we echo your call. The demand for accountability is more pressing than ever. There has been enough of turning a blind eye to the unimaginable suffering inflicted of the people affected by this conflict. For all the atrocities witnessed, justice, while seemingly a drop in the ocean, must still be ensured as a vital step in the right direction. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia.
Mr. President, Namibia aligns itself with the statement of the Africa Group and the NAM. We thank the Special Rapporteur for her comprehensive report, which exposes how the genocide being carried out by Israel in besieged Gaza Strip has become lucrative for corporate entities, including arms manufacturers and big tech, while at the same time advancing Israeli settler colonial project of displacement and replacement of the Palestinian people in the occupied territory. We are deeply disturbed to learn about the scale and extent of complicity of corporate entities in supporting the illegal Israeli occupation and its ongoing genocide in Gaza. Mr. President, Namibia firmly believes that the only viable answer to the question of Palestine is a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. We denounce any actions aimed at the displacement and replacement of Palestinian people from their land in the occupied territory. To conclude, we call upon states to hold Israel accountable for human rights violations and international crimes committed against the Palestinian people in the occupied territory and to comply with International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion of 2024. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Niger. They are absent. So I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Mr. President, Malaysia associates itself with the statements of the OIC and NAM. It has been 21 months since the beginning of Israel's onslaught against Palestinians in Gaza, marked by flagrant violations of international human rights and humanitarian law committed with unchecked impunity. Malaysia strongly condemns Israel's deliberate targeting of civilians as well as the perpetration of forced starvation and the obstruction of humanitarian aid as weapons of war. The systematic escalation of these measures is genocidal in nature and amounts to ethnic cleansing and total colonization. As elaborated by the Special Rapporteur in her report, we share grave concern over the role of the corporate machinery in sustaining Israeli settler colonial project of displacement and replacement of the Palestinians in the OPT. The entrenchment of Israel's illegal occupation and apartheid system driven by arms suppliers, tech firms, financial institutions and others must not go unaccounted for, and they demand scrutiny and accountability. In the face of a worsening humanitarian situation, we call on the international community to continue their support to UNRWA politically and financially. We firmly reject any attempt to alter the demographic and territorial character of Gaza through the intentional destruction of infrastructure and the mass forced displacement of Palestinians. Israel must realize that the only path to lasting peace and stability in the Middle East is through the establishment of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Mr. President, China has noted the report of the Special Rapporteur and expresses concern over the violation of international human rights law and IHL and the possible international crimes related to attacks on education facilities and religious and cultural rights. Sites. China is highly concerned over the human rights situation of the region, firmly support the just cause of the Palestinian people to restore their legitimate national rights, condemn all actions that harm innocent civilians, and calls for immediate lasting ceasefire to effectively alleviate humanitarian disaster in Gaza. China welcomes the recent adoption of the resolution by the Emergency Special Session of UNGA calling for immediate, unconditional, permanent ceasefire by all parties to the conflict reflects the consensus of the overwhelming majority of the member states. China regrets that some countries have ignored the long-standing sufferings of the Palestinian people. All countries are duty-bound to abide by international human rights law and IHL's. International community should take all necessary action to stop all the illegal activities, hold those responsible accountable to work together to effectively promote and protect human rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Mr. President, Vietnam is deeply concerned about the continued escalation of violence and the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We strongly call for the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, which is indispensable for the survival of the population. Vietnam urges all parties to exercise maximum restraint, uphold the UN Charter and international law, and fully comply with relevant UN resolution, and to provide provisional measure of the International Court of Justice. We call for more effective measures to ensure uninterrupted humanitarian relief for civilian population in Gaza and other affected areas. We support the indispensable role of UNRWA in delivering essential assistance and services to the Palestinian people, and we call for all efforts to ensure its safe, effective, and continuous operation. Vietnam reaffirms its unwavering support for the Palestinian people in exercising their right to self-determination and fulfilling their legitimate aspiration for full membership in the United Nations. We strongly advocate for a two-state solution that ensures the establishment of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders, in accordance with international law and relevant UN resolution. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Honduras. President, Honduras wishes to thank the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of her report, and we seize this opportunity to express our support for her mandate and our recognition for the valuable work that she does. We very much regret the ongoing worsening of the humanitarian situation. This is heightening the suffering of women and children, according to figures from the UN, show that more than 1 million people have been forcibly displaced and 500,000 people are facing hunger, and many more have food insecurity. Access to drinking water continues to be very limited, and the health system is on the brink of collapse. In this sense, we reiterate our urgent call for an immediate lifting of the blockade, which is obstructing aid, and there must be a permanent ceasefire. We take note of the information in the report on the 8 economic sectors that are facilitating or worsening the occupation and the humanitarian crisis. We therefore value the recommendations that have been included in the report and believe there must be national, international solutions that settle the situation and sanction corporations. We reiterate our commitment to international law. We will continue to promote for the respect of dignity and the right of the Palestinian people. Thank you, sir.
Merci.
Thank you. Is the delegation of Botswana in the room? I believe they are absent, and so I give the floor to the delegation of Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have reviewed the report of Ms. Special Rapporteur that has shed light on the role of economic actors in the violation of human rights, especially the displacement of Palestinians, confiscation of land, expansion of settlements, and related economic activities. We reaffirm the responsibility on transnational corporations in accordance with international law, especially when complicit in genocide. Sudan condemns the grave violations documented in the report. We express our full solidarity with the Palestinian people that has faced for decades all forms of violations. We reaffirm the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the establishment of an independent state within the 1967 borders. The occupying power must abide by its obligations in accordance with international law. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Chile.
Thank you, President. We would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for her report on the role of corporations in supporting the illegal occupation and the current military campaign in Gaza. We launch an appeal to states to reduce the involvement of corporations that are heightening human suffering. We can't build peace on a model where people are profiteering from violence. We have to abide by the guiding principles on business and human rights. These are the legal framework to ensure that states and enterprises comply with international law. The principles establish the obligation of states to act and companies must respect human rights. Even when states do not act, there must be reparation mechanisms for victims. We agree that corporate due diligence must be reinforced in cases of occupation and conflict because there is a greater risk of complicity with crimes. We therefore must speedily move on to appropriate accountability mechanisms. We believe there must be a legally binding instrument in this area and believe there is a need to ensure justice and reparation for Palestinian victims. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I now call the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. Belgium aligns itself with the EU statement and thanks the Special Rapporteur for her extensive report and her important work. Against the backdrop of ongoing violations of human rights and international humanitarian law in Gaza and the West Bank, The report offers an important contribution to the debate on the role, impact, and responsibility of the private sector in the occupied Palestinian territory. Belgium supports the Special Rapporteur's call to corporate entities to comply with their responsibilities under the guiding principles on business and human rights, and to cease all business activities and terminate relationships directly linked with, contributing to, and causing violations of IHL and human rights law in the OPT. In this regard, following the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 19 July 2024 on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the OPT, including East Jerusalem, and from the illegality of the continued presence of Israel in the OPT, Belgium, together with 10 other EU member states, has requested an in-depth analysis by the European Commission on the implications of this ICJ opinion for third states and international organizations, concrete measures to ensure the EU's full compliance with the advisory opinion are urgently needed. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. That was the last statement that it was possible for us to hear during the meeting, and we're going to move on to the list of national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations, and I now call the United Nations Watch.
Mr. President, is today's report balanced? Israel is accused of genocide 68 times. Now, on October 7th, the world saw Hamas start a war by invading Israel, firing thousands of rockets, massacring 1,200 people, including families and little children in their homes. Hamas pledged to do it again. Israel has been fighting a just war against a terrorist army, which cynically embeds itself among civilians. Ms. Albanese, war is not genocide. But in your report, there's no war at all. It's only about Israel. We ask, why does your report never mention once the October 7th invasion and massacre, or even the word Hamas? Why does your report never once mention Hezbollah on October 8th? Joining Hamas's war, they began firing thousands of missiles at Israel. Why does your report never once mention the Islamic Republic of Iran, which armed and trained its proxies and orchestrated the attacks, which itself fired hundreds of missiles at Israel? They openly call for genocide against the Israeli people. Why didn't you find reason to mention them once? Distinguished delegates, this report is an inversion. Silence on aggressors, openly pursuing genocide, and demonization for democracy, defending its people from a multi-front war. Ms. Albanese, do you now understand why a Swiss university canceled your panel this week for lack of balance? Mr. President, on April 1st, you released the report of the UN investigation, which found that the rapporteur's trip in Australia was funded by external groups. Ms. Albanese, will you release the documentation? Who funded you?
I give the floor to the Palestinian Return Center.
Mr. President, I quote, "She went to get us flour. They killed her. The bread was dipped in blood." These are the words of a child in Gaza after the Israeli forces deliberately opened fire on his mother while waiting for aid. Today, Gaza is facing not only relentless bombardment, but also mass starvation. According to UN agencies and the IPC, 2.2 million Palestinians, nearly the entire population of Gaza, are experiencing acute food insecurity, with many areas classified at famine level. But this is not a natural disaster. This is a calculated policy. Palestinians are being lured into Masa'id Maut, death traps, where Israeli forces repeatedly fire on desperate civilians waiting for food. This is not just collective punishment. It is the weaponization of hunger, the destruction of life support systems, and the targeting of the starving. And it is genocide, deliberate and public. We echo the findings of the Special Rapporteur, whose recent report is one of the most honest and principled assessments to come out of the UN systems in years. She calls it what it is. Francesca Albanese deserves not only protection, but our full support. We urge this Council to speak with clarity and the siege, demand accountability, and act now before Gaza is erased. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Women's International League for Peace and Freedom.
WILPF welcomes the rapporteur's report. We address states that continue to arm Israel. We ask, how much more evidence do you need to put an end to these arms transfers? How much more do you need to cease putting politics above international law? How much more before you stop complicity in Israel's crimes, including illegal occupation, apartheid, and genocide? States and companies, particularly those providing weapons or technological support to Israel, cannot claim ignorance of the international crimes being committed against Palestinians. They're happening in plain sight. Your continued support constitutes a clear violation of international law, not to mention that your actions are morally unconscionable. There's either compliance with international law or there is not. States and corporations cannot pick and choose. Every day that states refuse to act emboldens further crimes, further defiance, and unraveling of international law. Monsieur le Président, WILPF strongly supports the rapporteur's call for a full arms embargo, and we urge states and corporations to end complicity and to implement the Special Rapporteur's recommendations. To quote author Omar El-Akkad, one day, everyone will have always been against this. So we ask you, on that day, how will you look back and judge your actions? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Jerusalem Institute of Justice for a declaration by video.
Today, we are not witnessing a report. We are witnessing an indictment of Israel's very existence disguised in legal language. This report was authored by the same special rapporteur who openly supports the so-called resistance against Israel, a term that in the Middle East translates into the October 7 massacre, women raped, babies burned alive, children beheaded, and over 50 hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza. Globally, this narrative has fueled the most violent surge in anti-Semitism since Nazi Germany. Instead of promoting peace, the rapporteur promotes blacklisting, urging companies to cut ties with Israel's economy, infrastructure, and even humanitarian services. Cars, computers, desalinated water. Yes, even water for both Palestinians and Israelis are framed as crimes. How dare the Jewish people turn seawater drinkable? How dare they grow food in the desert. How dare they survive? This is not human rights work. It's economic warfare against the only democracy in the Middle East and part of a broader agenda to dismantle the Jewish state by other means. This report's logic mirrors the anti-Semitic BDS campaign, punish Israeli innovation, isolate its people, and deny the Jewish people the right to self-determination. We urge this council to reject this dangerous and biased report and to reaffirm that human rights must never be hijacked to justify hatred. Thank you.
I give the floor to Human Rights and Democratic Participation Center.
Madam Special Rapporteur, the Palestinian people in the occupied West Bank are witnessing a dangerous escalation in settler violence. This includes deliberate killings, the most recent of which was the murder of 3 young men from the village of Kufr Malik, east of Ramallah, on June 25, 2025. Settlers, under the protection of the Israeli occupation forces, have also carried out widespread attacks involving shootings, arson of homes and vehicles, uprooting of fruit-bearing trees, assaults on villages and towns, road closures, and land confiscation, all in blatant violation of international law and the Geneva Conventions. These settler attacks are not isolated incidents, but part of a systematic policy aimed at forcibly displacing Palestinians and imposing a colonial reality on the ground amid alarming international silence and a continued failure to hold perpetrators accountable. Shams emphasizes that these acts constitute an organized policy of forcible transfer and land appropriation. We recall the numerous resolutions of the UN Security Council and General Assembly condemning settlement activities, the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, and the provisions of international law, which unequivocally classify settlement expansion as an ongoing war crime. We call for the immediate removal of settlers from Palestinian land and demand urgent international action to hold settlers and the occupying power accountable for these crimes and to end the prevailing culture of impunity. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Coordinating Board of Jewish Organizations for an intervention by video.
It's not only governments that must be held accountable, but intergovernmental bodies, accountable to taxpayers who fund this body's operation, accountable to we the peoples, who include minorities like Jews and the diverse citizens of Israel. As an organization active at the UN since its founding, it's with dismay that we and many democracies have found that this mandate holder, more than any other, has serially violated her duty of universality, impartiality, and non-selectivity. She already had a long record of Holocaust trivialization, delegitimizing Israel and its supporters, justifying terrorism, and stigmatizing a definition of anti-Semitism adopted by experts and dozens of member states. In this new document, she seeks to formalize discrimination and further export conflict by singling out Israel and virtually any business or even charitable engagement with it for unprecedented abuse. But especially by defaming Israel as guilty of genocide, she has done inexcusable harm to the human rights architecture and all actual victims of atrocity. Does the rapporteur know that the Palestinian population has grown by millions over the course of Israel's history? When even distant events tolls remain unsettled, does she already trust Hamas claims and know how many current casualties are belligerents? Does she know Hamas tactics' correlation to casualties, how those losses compare to other conflicts, and how Israel's efforts to mitigate harm compare to other combatants elsewhere? Has she shown any interest in the overtly genocidal aims of Iran, Hamas, and other jihadists? Prejudice is not impartiality.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, everyone obviously has the right to express their opinions, especially in this council, but please, we must remain within acceptable limits to ensure that respectability in our discussion is guarded. So really, I ask you in particular to refrain from personal attacks against mandate holders. I give the floor to Palestinian Center for Human Rights for a joint statement by video.
Madam Special Rapporteur, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, PCHR, welcomes and commends your important report exposing the complicity of more than 60 corporations in Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people. The report presents a timely and urgent call for accountability at a time when Palestinians are enduring mass killing, starvation, displacement, and destruction. These corporations have enabled and profited from Israel's prolonged illegal occupation, illegal settlements expansion, and the ongoing genocide in Gaza, and must be held accountable. However, as stated in the report, the responsibility does not lie with corporations alone. States have the primary role of ensuring that corporate entities do not violate international law and respect human rights. PCHR calls on states to initiate criminal investigations into the corporations listed in the report for their complicity in human rights violations and international crimes, impose an immediate arms embargo, and hold all trade and financial relations that contribute to maintaining Israel's settler colonial regime. PCHR also calls on the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to immediately update the UN database and include the newly listed companies in the SR's report, including those involved in the Gaza genocide. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Al-Haq for a joint statement by video.
Welcome the timely report of the Special Rapporteur at a moment when corporate complicity continues to enable Israel's crimes with impunity. This month marks 1 year since the ICJ found Israel's presence in the OPT unlawful, violating the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and sustained through a regime of racial segregation and apartheid. Nearly a year later, and over 21 months into Israel's genocide in Gaza, states have yet to act in accordance with these findings. What persists is a system of impunity, sustained not only by military force, but by a global economy that profits from Palestinian dispossession. Corporations continue to service Israel's settlement enterprise, surveillance regime, and war economy, but so do nonprofit entities, some posing as humanitarian or environmental actors. The Jewish National Fund, for example, has for over a century spearheaded colonization, land theft, and demographic engineering under the false guise of charity. The JNF, while jointly holding annexed Palestinian land with the Israeli government, is no charity. They're a settler colonial entity that continues to expropriate occupied Palestinian territory to this day. These actors are central to Israel's apartheid and settler colonial regime, and states that grant them legal protection or tax benefits are complicit. States have legal obligations not to recognize, aid or assist unlawful acts, and to regulate all entities under their jurisdiction contributing to war crimes, apartheid, and genocide. These actors must be held to account through national legislation and international mechanisms, including listing on the UN database, not rewarded with tax exemptions. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the European Union of Jewish Students for a joint statement by video.
President, the European Union of Jewish Students, the World Jewish Congress, and the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists strongly reject the report presented by Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, a document whose inflammatory rhetoric, ideological framing, and legal distortion disqualify it as a credible human rights assessment. The report's credibility is undermined by its reliance on unverified activist sources and politicized platforms, including boycott campaigns and opaque databases that lack basic evidentiary standards. It is prejudgment masked as research. Particularly alarming is the section accusing global companies, universities, and charities of genocide complicity for engaging with Israel's economy. Dubious at best, these accusations made without legal due process encourage economic blackmail and threaten legitimate actors with reputational harm. Ms. Albanese claims to act in defense of human rights, but in truth, her report vilifies Israel's existence. It stretches legal concepts such as apartheid and genocide beyond recognition. It describes the founding of the Jewish state in 1948 as a colonial crime and speaks of displacement and replacement as a process ongoing since the inception of the Zionist project. These are not legal arguments, but ideological declaration aimed at delegitimizing Jewish self-determination itself. This mandate does not serve the cause of peace, nor it stands with the Palestinian people. It serves only to divide. We urge this council to reject this report and the mandate under which it was written.
Thank you. I give the floor to Defense for Children International.
Whilst Palestinian children in Gaza are being slaughtered and starved, businesses and corporations continue to profit from Israel's ongoing genocide. The sale of arms, military aircraft, surveillance tools, and munitions are just some of the ways private actors benefit from this assault on Palestinian life. These companies operate with impunity, fueling a military-industrial complex that sustains the mass killing of children and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Across the occupied Palestinian territory, the situation is further exacerbated by the systematic dispossession of land and natural resources. Illegal Israeli settlement enterprises, in clear violation of the Hague regulations and other international legal standards, extract immovable resources for corporate gain. Such practices entrench structural deprivation, denying Palestinian children of their rightful economic, cultural, and environmental inheritance. It is imperative that private sector actors be held accountable for their role in enabling Israel's war crimes, crimes against humanity, and apartheid. Member states must also be held accountable for facilitating and profiting from these abuses, particularly through public and institutional investments in companies complicit in violations of international law. We therefore call on member states to ensure the UN database on business enterprises involved in Israeli settlements is updated annually, expanded in scope, and adequately resourced. Terminate all economic ties with companies that profit from illegal Israeli settlements. Fulfill extraterritorial obligations by regulating companies under their jurisdiction that support Israel's system of apartheid, and end all public investments in entities complicit in violations of international law, and reaffirm the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and full sovereignty over their land and natural resources. I thank you.
Merci. C'était la dernière.
Thank you. That was the last speaker. We could hear this in this debate. I'll now get the floor back to the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Albanese. You have 6 minutes, madam.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President.
I'd like to thank very much all member states who took the floor. I cannot fail to acknowledge and express gratitude for the support expressed for this report and my mandate, support that really moves me deeply. It is reassuring against the pro-genocide voices that continue to infiltrate this room. The apocalypse we are watching in Gaza reveals the unhinged inhumanity of this propaganda. I have to say, this has been one of the most focused and substantive interactive dialogues I've experienced as a special rapporteur. I did not expect it, especially in light of the regrettable delay in the report's submission, for which I apologize. On that note, I must say, the continued funding of the United Nations and OHCHR by many member states will not serve justice or accountability and will not make our work speedier. These cuts do not reflect a lack of means, excellencies, but a shift in priorities toward rearmament. And this is alarming, and I sincerely hope that this course will be reconsidered and reversed. Now, going to the specifics of the question raised and considerations they triggered. Failing to diagnose is failing to cure. This is not a conflict. This is not a war. It's not an escalation of violence. It is intentional ethnic cleansing, which is entailing genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity in the meantime. Second point is that failing to plan is planning to fail. I hear that the two-state solution is the only solution. No, before this, the only solution is ensuring rights and freedoms for everyone between the river and the sea, which means end of the genocide now, end of the occupation by September this year, and end of the apartheid. This will be liberating for anyone in the land that they call home, for the Palestinians and Israelis, Muslim, Jews, Christians, atheists, everyone. Considering the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation It's ludicrous. It's ludicrous that the state that is being accused of international crimes, including using starvation as a weapons of war, is given the responsibility to distribute aid to the Palestinians. It's a death trap and must be stopped. The United Nations must regain control over humanitarian aid. Regarding alternatives that can be explored, I really commend the government of the state of Colombia and the state of South Africa for convening the Hague Group. This is the most relevant diplomatic and political development I've registered in the past 20 months. It doesn't make sense to resort to political discussion about a peace process that has not translated even in the recognition of the state of Palestine among some of you. So the emergency now, as these two states are proposing, and I hope that many of you will join, is to end the emergency in Gaza, end the blockade, end the occupation, and end the apartheid, but starting with the discussion on how to end the emergency. The substantive question on how states can strengthen due diligence in their own jurisdiction to have a corporate disengage from crimes. Strengthening human rights due diligence domestically implies establishing binding legal obligation requiring businesses to assess, act on, and report risks of involvement. However, under the guiding principles on business and human rights, there is the threshold for responsibility is a direct link between a company's operation and human rights violations. All companies I put on notice in preparation of my report go far beyond a mere link into active contribution. So the due diligence process must lead to action, and identifying risk is not sufficient. In the case of the occupied Palestinian territory, the violations are so grave, sustained, and structural that leverage is not just ineffective, it's meaningless. And at this point, the responsibility of those who continue to engage in businesses with the State of Israel become one of termination and disengagement and reparation. Continued corporate involvement legitimizes and normalizes a system found by the International Court of Justice to be unlawful, to be dismantled totally and unconditionally, and with the plausibility of genocide confirmed by the provisional measures and International Court of Justice and other crimes confirmed by the ICC arrest warrants, there is no alternative to this. Corporations who stay involved with intent, knowledge, and purpose must be held accountable. I want to conclude with one remark. As with reckonings that followed corporate complicity in apartheid South Africa and Nazi Germany, the apocalyptic situation in Palestine poses a defining test. Can global markets exist without enabling and profiting from injustice and impunity? Palestine today is a revealer, a mirror held up to the world's moral and political failure, and ending the genocide and ensuring this is the last crime the apartheid Israel commits against the Palestinians is a moral and legal obligation. And this requires not just outrage and condemnation, but rupture, reckoning, and the courage to dismantle what has enabled it. Thank you.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this interactive dialogue. I wish to thank Ms. Francesca Albanese for her participation. So we have concluded our examination of item 7 of the agenda. We'll have a brief break before we start our interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism. Thank you.
Colegas.
Distinguished colleagues, let's resume our meeting. Your Excellencies, I now declare that we can move on to agenda item 9, titled Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia and Related Forms of Intolerance, follow-up and implementation of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action. We can now begin the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related forms of intolerance. I'm very pleased indeed to welcome the mandate holder, the Rapporteur, Ms. Ashwini. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. I now give the floor to Ms. Ashwini so that she can introduce her report. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, it is an honor to again present before the Human Rights Council. I would like to express my gratitude to all the UN member states